now been 4 years since Steve Yzerman was named general manager of the Detroit Red Wings, but since then, how has he rebuilt Detroit? How do they look in the future? And is this a Red Wings team that can compete and win a Stanley Cup with Steve Yzerman's current core? Watch till the end because we're going to be breaking down every little bit of Steve Yzerman's tenure in Detroit to see what is next. And hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this all year long, every day. You won't want to miss it. Now, when Steve Yzerman was hired as GM of the Red Wings, he had a lot of work to do. Ken Holland left him with an absolute mess of a roster, who still had some solid players coming up like Dylan Larkin, players like Anthony Mantha as well, but a lot of cap troubles and a team that was just not near good enough for the cap troubles they were having. But Steve Yzerman came in, immediately started making fixes, and especially in the draft right after he was hired, made some big moves to improve the future of Detroit. Most notably, in his first draft as Red Wings GM, he went out and surprised the hockey world, selecting Moritz Seider with the 6th overall pick. A pick that was questioned, a pick that was surprising to pretty much every single person in the hockey world. But of course, this turned out, and Moritz Seider has turned into one of the best players from the 2019 draft period. Then, of course, you also got players like Elmer Soderblom later in the draft in the 6th round that are starting to fill into the roster already. And throughout the 2020 season, they started to cut some fat as well, getting rid of Mike Green and his contract, as well as getting rid of Andreas Athanasiou and acquiring some pretty good picks in the process. Then you go on to the 2020 NHL draft. After getting Moritz Seider, a future top pairing D for them, they went out and got a future first liner for themselves in Lucas Raymond, 4th overall in the 2020 draft, and also a lot of prospects that haven't hit the scene yet for Detroit, but are going to be solid, like William Willander, Theodor Niederbach, Cross Hannes, and of course players that were just traded like Donovan Sabrango that brought them in Alex DeBrincat. And then you go on to another extremely important draft in 2021, where they got Simon Edvinsson, 6th overall, also added goaltenders Sebastian Cossa, and some solid players in the prospect pool like Shai Boom, especially Carter Mazur, who's been fantastic over these past couple years, and Red Savage, players that will be filling out throughout the lineup, won't be superstars necessarily unless Edvinsson really pops, but will be great players for the future still. Now, in the 2022 season, the Red Wings would see some slight improvement, but would still finish 6th in the Atlantic Division and would pick 8th in the 2022 NHL draft. But they would end up selecting Austrian center Marco Kasper, the 8th overall pick, who's looking like a really solid, tenacious middle 6C for the future. Also getting players like Dmitry Bolchinikov, players like Amadeus Lombardi that could really help their forward group throughout. For that 2022 draft, adding on that depth in the forward group was huge, and they got that. Now for the Red Wings looking to improve in the 2023 season, they went out and made some huge free agent moves, signing players like Andrew Kopp, as well as Ben Chiarot, David Perron, Dominic Kubalik, Ali Mata, a lot of players for the defense and forward group around that middle 6, around the middle pairing that will help or try to help the Red Wings now. And even though there were some massive overpayments, especially in players like Ben Chiarot and a little bit in Andrew Kopp, still, these were players that were hoped to improve that roster for now and forget about those contracts a little bit later. On top of that, for the Red Wings, they acquired Ville Husso from the St. Louis Blues, who had a great 2022 season. And with all these different moves, the Red Wings were looking at competing in the 2023 season, taking that bigger next step and being in the playoff race, right? Well, for them, that wouldn't quite work out. They actually dropped in the division, going from 6th to 7th in the 2023 season. And even though they would improve by 6 points, those big additions and really everything and the forward group and the goaltending and all of it didn't really add up to much success, didn't really add up to much of a jump. And there was a multitude of different reasons why, but the Red Wings simply were not good enough and not a good enough roster to compete. That's really the truth of it. But we saw Steve Yzerman react to that lack of success by making some big moves around the trade deadline. First, trading Filip Hronek and a 4th round pick to the Canucks for the picks that would become Axel, Sandin, Pellikka, and Felix Nilsson. Now also trading Tyler Bertuzzi to the Red Wings for a 1st and 4th round pick. On top of trading Jacob Vrana as well and Oscar Sundqvist, there were a lot of different selling moves that increased the future of this team, but also made it still a stagnant team in the standings that also got rid of assets that would have helped them still that next year. But because of that selling, the Red Wings had loads of options in the 2023 draft, and they used them well, drafting Nate Danielson, Axel, Sandin, Pellikka in the 1st round, a potential top middle 6 center, as well as a potential middle pairing D in the future. Also getting Trey Augustine, who's one of the best goaltending prospects of the draft, on top of players like Brady Cleveland and Andrew Gibson, who could be solid two-way guys, and especially Brady Cleveland on the physical and defensive side, and just getting an overall balanced draft that can fill a lot of different positions. It wasn't anything absolutely electric, but the Red Wings draft was still solid and still had a lot of depth that was added onto the prospect pool again. But even though the Red Wings sold pretty well in the 2022 trade deadline, they still went out and got a ton of players. JT Compher, Justin Holl, Shane Gostisbehere, Daniel Sprong, and players like James Reimer. A lot of big names here, and a lot of players that I think were very overpaid, and players like Justin Holl, a little bit in JT Compher. But still, just like that 2022 offseason, even though there might have been some overpayments there, these are still players that have been looked at to improve the team, to make it better, to improve that depth, and to improve the team now. And then Steve Yzerman made his biggest move to improve the Red Wings to date, getting Alex DeBrincat from the Ottawa Senators in exchange for a first rounder, a fourth rounder, Dominik Kubalik, and Donovan Sebrango. A lot of different players that have been brought in, with Kubalik being a free agent, Sebrango being a draftee of his, but a lot of talent being acquired that ultimately landed him Alex DeBrincat, a player who, even though his last year of Ottawa wasn't that great, still had pretty great point production, and in Detroit can do some massive things for them and be a first line forward that, let's be honest, they desperately needed. But let's take a look at this Red Wings roster now, 4 years after Steve Yzerman was hired as GM, to see if this team could potentially be good enough in the future and take that next step into Stanley Cup contenders. Again, they improved by 6 points last year, but we're 7th in the Atlantic, and that Atlantic is wide open. There is a lot of opportunity here to reach up the standings, but that's also the same thing for teams like Ottawa and Buffalo, teams that were better than last year and are still taking those next steps. Will the Red Wings be able to compensate for that? Will they still be able to be competitive in this Atlantic? We'll have to find out. Is this Red Wings roster, is this current core good enough to win a Stanley Cup? That's the question that we all have to ask ourselves, because even though they acquired Alex DeBrincat, it's pretty much set in stone that Detroit won't be tanking any longer, and likely that 9th overall picks, those 8th overall picks, those 4th overall picks, they aren't going to happen again. They'll likely be in that more 10 to 12 to 15, maybe even later range if Detroit is really able to pop off, but they aren't going to be getting any superstar talents again. They aren't going to be getting any generational talents unless they get some massive draft lottery luck, which with Detroit, we all know isn't happening. But they're a team that, to me, has kind of been screwed the most by the lottery. You look at their forward group, and even with Alex DeBrincat, it's solid, it's okay, but to me, this might be the biggest problem for Detroit going forward. They've drafted a lot of players, especially recently, like Nate Danielson and Marco Kasper, that if they pop, they'll be solid middle six centers and guys that will do their job very respectively, but will they be first liners? Will they be first line impact players on Stanley Cup winning teams? I love Nate Danielson. I like Marco Kasper a lot, but I would say no. I mean, the highest forward they've drafted has been Lucas Raymond, and even though I love him as well, he's a player that I'm not sure is going to be a franchise-changing face, a Nikita Kucherov type of player, if you will, a player like Mikko Rantanen. Those type of wingers are also very hard to find, and even though the lottery has screwed them from some players like that in the past, I feel like for Detroit, that top-end talent, even with Alex DeBrincat, might be the biggest thing that holds them back. But you look for other free agent signings, and especially in the forward group, they prioritize that depth. Players like JT Compher, Perron, Kopp, these will be solid middle sixers for them, but I'm not sure, again, how much they're able to move the needle. I think the first line in the future of Raymond, Larkin, DeBrincat will be good, but is it going to be elite? Is it going to be one of the best first lines in the league? I would say no, and even though I like that depth, to me, especially even in the drafting, they've kind of gotten more higher floor guys like Nate Danielson and Marco Kasper, who even though I like a lot, I'm not sure if they'll be able to move that needle completely. And I think for Detroit, having that type of superstar talent, they're kind of missing that still a little bit. Even with Alex DeBrincat there, I think that might be a problem that haunts them in the future. And then we go on to the defense for the Detroit Red Wings, and this is to me the most wait and see part of this Red Wings rebuild, because they still have a lot of players coming up, like Simone Edvinsson, like William Nylander, Shai Buam, players as well that will be coming up that will be filling those roles, especially on that bottom pair. But right now, it's fine, I guess. I mean, Jake Walman and Seider, absolute rock stars. I love me some Jake Walman. Players like Shane Gostisbehere are going to be good, but again, you got players like Justin Holl and Ben Chiarot, who will both be making $8 million combined for the next 3 seasons, and to me, that's just a little bit of a mismatch to me. I like players like Olli Mata as well, but I feel like for Detroit, they've kind of put stock in defensemen that I don't quite love, like Justin Holl, like Ben Chiarot, and to me, that defense could be fine, I guess. It could be okay, but when your forward group, especially in the top end, isn't revolutionizing anything either, right now, that defense does look a lot poor. Still, though, when Simone Edvinsson does come up, when players like William Nylander come up, it will look better. And of course, Axel Sandin Pellikka, once he's given the time and patience to come up, he will be fantastic there too, I think, on that Detroit defense. But I feel like for the now especially, they've been trying to compete, they've been trying to make that defense better, and even though I guess it is, I still don't have the biggest faith in it. And then you go into the goaltending, and this is also another huge part that is a wait and see, because they've acquired Ville Husso, they've acquired Alex Nedeljkovic, they have, of course, got James Reinbacher in free agency. They've gone through a lot of goaltenders over the past couple of years, and Ville Husso was okay at points for Detroit. He had a couple of really solid stretches and was really great in those stretches, but really failed to have that consistency, really failed to have that on a game-to-game basis, and I think that kind of haunted his season. Of course, they still have Sebastian Cossa, and they've gotten Trey Augustine, so in the future, I think that goaltending will be good, but again, it's just that kind of no man's land that Detroit is in, with really everything on the roster. They have players coming up and some promising prospects coming up, but they've gone after big free agents that I just don't think are going to really move the needle. To me, Detroit was in a position where I think they could have sold big time this last year, and maybe been a little bit less competitive last year, and maybe gotten a little bit of a better pick, and it really could have aided them if they were in that top 5, in that top 7, gotten to play like Matvei Michkov, heaven forbid. That would have been perfect for Detroit and exactly what they needed potential-wise. But as of right now, they've just kind of put themselves in no man's land, kind of put themselves right in the middle of the NHL. And while those prospects will be coming up and will be making the team better, I feel like they're in a really weird position, especially in the Atlantic, that is so competitive, so tight up the middle, and to me, Detroit is still kind of looking on the outside looking in. But again, especially the free agent signings, and you see the players that Detroit has put a lot of stock in. You got Andrew Copp and JT Compher, 2 players that will be making $5 million plus for the next 4 years at least, with Compher making $5.1 million for the next 5, and Andrew Copp making $5.6 million for the next 4. And you got players like Ben Chiarot and Justin Holl, players like Ville Husso and James Reimer. A lot of players that they put a lot of stock in to be difference makers for this Detroit team and to truly put them over the top in the playoff race. And to me, I just don't think those are the names that are going to really help you, especially short term. But that, to me, is the only real reason why we've seen these signings, seen these free agency signings happen. There's been a couple of solid ones, I think. Daniel Sprong is going to be really solid for them. I do like Klim Kostin being added onto that forward group. Christian Fischer is a good add as well. And I think on the defense, Ali Mata has proved to be solid. Jake Wellman was a great addition in the Nicoletti trade. There has been good moves here, and there has been players that will bring good value. But the problem is it enough, especially for the cap hit? I mean, again, you're putting more than $10 million into Andrew Copp and JT Compher, more than $8 million into Ben Chiarot and Justin Holl. And to me, those numbers just don't add up for the players we're talking about here. And again, considering the term with Holl and Chiarot for at least the next 3 seasons, for a Compher and Copp for at least the next 4, and to me, there's a lot of prospects here that might kind of get stalled out because of these, frankly, mid players clogging up the lineup. I mean, especially look at a player that like a Marco Kasper, who I think could be ready over these next couple of seasons, but now he has to deal with Compher and Copp making $5 million plus, and how are you able to justify to any coach to play Kasper over those 2 guys? It's a big workload, it's a big responsibility, and I feel like for Detroit, they've just added a lot onto the middle of that lineup that is just kind of okay at best. And to me, for Detroit, again, it doesn't make those questions of being in no man's land any worse. To me, they might be the most average team in the NHL looking at it right now, and I don't think that's the position you really want to be in, ever in the NHL. But here's the big difference that I think really makes it for Detroit here, is the fact that I think they're still banking almost completely on their prospect pool turning this around. Because I don't think, again, players like JT Compher, players like Andrew Copp, players like Ben Chiarot and Justin Holl are going to be the ones putting you over the top. For Detroit, you need to have Simon Edvinsson become a superstar. You need to have Lucas Raymond get better and better and be a true first-line forward. You need to have players like Elmer Soderblom and Jonathan Berggren really fill out that lineup and really become great middle sixers. You need a lot of development into the goaltending. You need Sebastian Cossa and Trey Augustine to be your goaltending tandem. And to me, I think for free agency, you're supposed to add players that will hopefully be able to put those things over the top, hopefully be able to fill out that roster. But to me, I think Detroit has overpaid in a lot of different ways for players that won't make that big of a difference and won't really put less pressure on the prospect pool either. But the biggest question is still this: has Steve Yzerman built the Detroit Red Wings into a true contender, a team that can win the Stanley Cup? As of right now, I would say no. Now, we still haven't seen what we could see in the future. Maybe we see more trades like the Alex DeBrincat deal. That is a great start, but with how the roster is constructed, how it is going to be constructed, I would say no personally. I still think they need to add add another game breaker on offense if they even have one already. A player that can drive play exceedingly well. Their own Jack Eichel type, in my opinion. Alex DeBrincat is a great start, but to me, they need somebody else. Maybe on that left wing, perhaps. Lucas Raymond could be that, but I still think he needs a lot of development to reach that level. And even though that defense is going to be stellar, maybe that goaltending does turn a corner. You see what he was able to build in Tampa with Stamkos, with Point, with Kucherov, with Hedman, with Vasilevsky. Moritz Seider is maybe the only player I would say that could reach that superstar talent, could reach that level besides maybe Alex DeBrincat, who they just acquired. To me, that's a little bit of a problem, and especially when you compare with Tampa, who had that depth as well as having that superstar power. To me, I think that could be something that Detroit misses. With Tampa Bay, at least in Steve Yzerman's time, they missed that depth. They had that star power. With Detroit, I think they're going to have that depth in droves, especially on the defense. But that star power might be a problem, and that could be what holds them back in the end. Will they be Carolina 2.0, where they really lack that top-end scoring, or will they find that different gear? That is the question. But folks, Steve Yzerman is my favorite GM of all time, and we've obviously learned in the past to not doubt him. At the same time, I can still admit the concerns that I have. I can still admit the faults because everybody is human. And I mean, who is a robot that signs that Ben Chiarot contract? It was absolutely a human that signed that Ben Chiarot contract, that is for sure. And Steve Yzerman can even have mistakes time to time as well. And to me, I think there has been a lot of mistakes, a lot of concerns that haven't been brought up just because he is Steve Yzerman, just because he is one of the most legendary figures in hockey right now. But to me, I think there is still things that we can touch on, still things that we can bring up, and still conversations that we can have. I want to know in the comments down below, though, do you guys still trust in the Steve Yzerman plan? Has it been completely broken for you? Do you think the Red Wings can be a contender? Do you think they can win the Stanley Cup with this core? Do you think it is good enough to reach that level? I want to know down below. I want to know how they do next year and all your predictions there. So make sure you comment down below all those thoughts. Of course, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. And thank you so much for watching this breakdown. We'll see what happens next with this Detroit core. But this next year is going to be fascinating for them. That is for sure. Thank you guys so much for watching, though. And I will see you in the next one. Have a great day and goodbye.